Well, good morning, everybody. First, we're just going to walk through kind of the where we've been before we get into the where we're going in this forecast. But I just want to kind of give you a heads up of what I will be talking about. A lot of the story this week will be about a big jet extension coming into the west, and then we're going to get into where I think this pattern may be going in February. But to be honest, most of the slides that I have over here are going to be about just kind of an analog approach to understanding what El Nino could mean for the remainder of this winter season and the start of spring, and then what happens if we just look at a few very specific events that might look like we've got this year. So we're going to do that at the end here. But over the last week, we've had, of course, that large high pressure cell that sat just off the southeast coast that just set up this corridor in through here where the atmosphere is wide open to Gulf moisture transport, and it delivered a lot of rain. Now, just thinking about what this rain did, remember, some of this on the northern side where we did not get much rain also had snowmelt due to mild temperatures. So there was a lot of moisture being added to the soil here across a big area. And of course, it caused major flooding issues. We talked a lot about that last week. I'm not ignoring that. But the idea here is I'm just thinking about what this means to set up spring. So I did tell you last week I need to go home and dig a hole in my yard. Well, I do have a soil moisture probe. And so I went back here and I took a soil sample where I live in Illinois, just wondering if I could get down there to about 12 to 16 inches. And that entire profile where I live, which was bone dry in the fall, is now completely saturated and very, very muddy. I wish I could go down a lot deeper than that, but the one I have doesn't go much deeper than those, than down to about 12 to 16 inches. Now, another way to look at this is just to step back over the last couple of weeks. And again, we identify a couple of areas that I really want to be watching carefully. You start to notice there are pockets, okay, of the plains, and especially the northern parts of the plains that have really missed out, including a big section of the upper Midwest, on getting any sense of moisture out of this pattern. It's largely been because the flow comes in and splits, right? So we have some of this subtropical branch to the south. A lot of this northern branch is quite weak, and it just tends to ridge out in this area, not delivering much at all in the way of good flow for Canada coming into the northern plains. So this is quite a contrast from a year ago where we just piled up the snow in this area. You also notice that there's been a bit of a drier area here from parts of Georgia through the Carolinas. And this overall is not a major concern given the moisture that came in before this, but we're just trying to assess if there's places where there's still a big drought worry going into winter, through winter. Where is it, and can we identify it and keep an eye on it? Now, I don't really bring up a lot of the areas in the west because of what's about to change here in the next few days, but we just need to keep this map in the back of our mind, So how about some ranks? Let's do a 30-day window. So this will be from December 30th to January 28th. And again, you see that issue from Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP and Michigan. This has kind of been our drier corridor. We've lately delivered better rains into parts of Arizona and Southern California, including the flooding about a week ago into San Diego. But just take note from this part of Texas. I mean, this is one of the wettest for eastern Texas, one of the wettest 30-day time periods in history, looking back 132 years. And this is also just a really hammered an area in the midsection of the country that is still living with, soil moisture deficits that need repaired. Of course, we had the big ice storm last week, or a little more than a week ago, in parts of the Pacific Northwest right here in Oregon. Heavy rains have come through southern Michigan, up New England. There's a lot to talk about in this pattern at the beginning of this year. But if we distill it all down into what made it, into the soil, this is the root zone soil moisture map. And this goes down 100 centimeters or 40 inches. And the very good news is on NASA's estimates here, we have made some pretty significant repairs in some missing moisture. Now, I say all of that reminding you that these parts of Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, this part of Minnesota, Wisconsin, just think about this section of the Corn Belt here. We have some snow still sitting on the ground, which means it's going to continue to melt, but it did not get really down there deep and recharge the moisture according to NASA's data. I do also take note that there are pockets throughout Indiana and Ohio that are missing out. So it's not just to kind of hit a couple of areas that I think look great, it's to remind us that there are spots that are missing. But with all this moisture, of course, the Mississippi River is kind of doing what we predicted it was going to be doing. It's about 12 feet above low stage. And as we said, it would kind of bounce, right? We'd just see it going up and down as we recover through the rest of winter and towards spring. I did want to bring up the same graphic I showed last week from water.weather.gov. Just looking again at those gauges that are showing some stage of flooding. We've got 127 of them across the country, including a lot right here in the Midwest and a lot down here in the lower Mississippi River Basin, getting over into parts of Texas that are still flooding today. But the story right now is going to be shifting to the jet stream position and strength across the Pacific and what it leaves for the rest of North America. So I want to show you something I was looking at last night. There was a Delta flight that's on its way to Detroit. I started watching it late last night, and it's interesting, the flight path that it took. So it was going from South Korea to Detroit. Now it's almost there. It's just about landed as the time I was recording this. But what I was fascinated by was its flight track. So take a look at the place it went. So it started here and flew across the open Pacific, made its way right here over parts of like Washington, and is now this morning coming in at this angle toward Detroit. Now, what's telling about this is the trajectory it took really matches what the jet stream was doing. So they were using it as a tailwind. And if I just show you, there's two lines on this graph. See these dashed lines? The intended the intended aircraft ground speed was 566 miles an hour, and it was expected to fly at 35,000 feet. That's what those two lines represent. But if I take you back here, and it was flying across the Pacific, watch that. That straight line across the Pacific, okay, there were times where the plane's ground speed was almost 780 miles an hour. So 220 miles an hour faster than what was planned simply because of the tailwind. Just amazing, I think, to see the strategy here. And if you notice at the very end, see how it made that turn to come up here? Now, there may have been other reasons for this, but I wonder if it's because that's where the jet was taking it. Look at the jet stream. So here's the 200 mile an hour tailwind, and then this move toward coming here, was it just to ride the rest of that tailwind up until we got into parts of Washington? I think it's fascinating to see that was maybe the strategy of that particular flight path. But this will be the talk for the week. What does this do? How does it split as it comes across North America? And what is the end result of this for our precipitation and temperature patterns? So here we go. Let's take a look at this same feature, but top down. So there it is, okay? 6 miles above our heads, moving at speeds of average speeds of 200 miles an hour right here in the middle. And then here's the split. So it gets to this point, it starts to break apart. There's another part that comes down here way into Mexico and rolls across the rest of the country. So as I play this forward, let's go through the rest of the day on Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. What we are going to get out of this is flow that comes across, busts up like this into a large ridge, flow to the south. And so what you do is you end up leaving a huge section of the country out of the flow. Now, we will get one little clipper that'll come over the top of this early this week, going through the Great Lakes and eventually into the southeast. But that's it. It's got to go over that ridge, which doesn't provide much support for its development. But through Thursday into Friday and Saturday, that's the pattern. And what wins out in the end is we don't reinvigorate a polar or northern branch of the jet. We just keep, even after the jet retracts, the subtropical being the most dominant feature. So this is out there to next Sunday, playing into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Now remember, we talked about February 5th through the 7th as turning the flow around and starting to get it to move. But I just want to show you, the newest forecasts are keeping this much farther to the south than the previous forecast, and that's going to change up how far throughout the plains and Midwest we're going to be able to bring in precipitation. But from the 7th through the 8th and 9th, this is really the name of the game. We're just got the jet stream more in its subtropical position, so here and here. And as a result, we're going to leave, again, a large section of the country out of the flow. I'm thinking about the Northwest, I'm thinking about parts of the Northern Plains, Canadian Prairie. We just need to see what this does south overall as well. Okay, so if that is what I'm telling you is the most dominant factor, let's kind of get out and see the repercussions of this. Finally, we have a day where there's not widespread fog from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the East Coast. We just have a few places here kind of lined up on the Mississippi that are still dealing with dense fog early this morning. We do have some there's actually a winter storm warning out for parts of the Appalachian Mountains here on the western-facing slopes. And we do have all of these areas down here still showing up with flood warnings, including a big section of Illinois and along the Illinois River. Now, if you come over here to the west, these are high wind advisories and watches and warnings we're keeping an eye out on. Just to see the strong southerly wind that's going to support some very warm temperatures later on today. In fact, if we want to see those temps, take a look at this. This is the newest update. We're going to be, we just came out of an ice storm, a week ago, and now the temperatures are up in the 50s and 60s in the Northwest. We just came out of wind chills of minus 50, 12, 13 days ago. Now we've got temperatures that are going to crack 50. That's 27 degrees warmer than average. What a change in the pattern just in a short amount of time here. Now, in terms of precip, let's just pick this up at 7 a.m. this morning. We're going to watch primarily just one little clipper that's going to sneak over the top of the ridge into the Great Lakes. You'll see it showing up right there. And at this point, even though we're not seeing a lot of risk out of this from the National Weather Service or the WPC, I'm rocking back and forth just to make note of the fact that there could be a little bit of leading edge ice with this overnight tonight into early Tuesday morning. And then the high-res NAM is a bit more aggressive than the other models on having all this be over to snow by tomorrow night, 6 p.m. on Tuesday night. But we'll just watch it because it will push toward the Appalachian Mountains and then move east. Now, it's really the only show in town because this deep low that's sitting and spinning off the west coast, it really doesn't bring its main frontal boundary in here till Wednesday. And that's when we start to see some of the, the heavier precipitation. And to kind of get a play on that, we just need to look out longer. So we'll go to the WPC and we'll look at the next 7 days. So what will happen over the next 7 days is the split flow, which will do something like this and like this, will eventually end up targeting parts of Northern California, Central California, and Southern California. And we're going to watch a high pressure cell sink in like this, keeping much of the potential rainfall pretty far to the south, other than the little clipper I just showed you. It's not really a clipper. It's like this kind of system that rolls over the top of the ridge and comes to the Great Lakes today and tomorrow. So that's the mainstay of this pattern. And to see it, let's just go to our high-res models that are global. So the GFS on the left, the European on the right. Let's just kind of play these out. So we've seen that one. Now notice that neither the GFS nor the European is trying to put down snow like the NAM was doing. We'll have to watch it carefully to see if we do get a little bit of snow mixed in with this. But we played this out now through Tuesday. Here's that deep low coming into the west coast by Wednesday morning. And there's Wednesday afternoon and evening. Then we get into early Thursday morning. And that's really putting in quite a bit of moisture into California. We'll take a look at how much in just a second here. Now going into Friday, that low is going to move and push its flow right into the Central Rockies, in fact, line up with the Rockies. And then by Friday, getting into Saturday, some of it's going to move into parts of the southern and central plains. But high pressure builds in through this corridor, keeping a lot of this farther to the south. And remember, there is no jet stream flow to support this. The jet stream's doing this. So there's no reason for there to be a low here. In fact, there's better reason for convergent flow and high pressure to form. But if I kind of rock you back and forth, this is the weekend. The one thing I am seeing that I'm going to keep an eye on is going to be how much moisture do we get throughout the central and northern plains, especially up into Montana here, because this is one of our areas that's been quite dry as of late. You then see both models kind of line it out and develop a low farther to the south, so it goes over parts of the southeast. And then as I just keep playing it forward, maybe a little bit of light snow through parts of the Canadian prairie. I'm talking about right here early next week. But most of the action is going to be here. It's going to be west. It's going to be with the flow coming in from that extended piece of the jet. So why don't we go and look at snow, because I'm really wondering how much more we can add with the warmth that we've got. So that's just through Wednesday. So you can see some light snow coming through here, pushing up against, the Appalachian Mountains, a little bit of New England, but the west too mild to get much snow until, here we go. That's basically the day on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Let's get out there into Monday and Tuesday of next week. So I'll be watching this carefully. I'd love to see that snow come in there because we don't currently have snow on the ground in a lot of these places. And then take a look as the jet just slides through California. There is the potential that over the next 10 days, parts of California's Sierra Nevadas could pick up 2 to 3 feet of snow. We could add quite a bit here into the Intermountain West and some out here into the Western Plains. But with the way that ridge is breaking up, no chance in this area. Too mild, just don't have the right kind of flow. But just to show you what the snowpack looks like before this, we're sitting okay in a lot of our basins, but that area I keep focusing in on here up in Montana, this is one of our drier spots. Down here in Southern California, we need to add a lot more to the Sierra Nevadas right into this corridor here as well. So we'll wait to see how this map's going to change very, very soon. To pick up on this precipitation discussion another way, though, let's go to probabilities. So next 10 days, probability of 1/10 of an inch or less. Okay, so our driest areas right in through here, and then in West Texas and parts of New Mexico. So I know there's a lot of folks, especially right in this part of the Midwest, that are happy with a drier stretch of weather. But you get up here into Wisconsin, Minnesota, this has been a down year on snow, and to be drier in this area has got us kind of concerned about what's going to happen between now and spring. The wetter side of this, let's step it up to 1 inch. This is the probability of getting at least 1 inch It's mostly the west coast, but that little corridor there to the south of that high pressure cell I mentioned is coming in later this week. That's your best chances. The wettest spots that we're going to be in the west. That's the probability of 2 inches of liquid and 4 inches. So great, we could really put some snow down here in the Sierra Nevada. In fact, let's go look at the snow chances. How about the probability of an inch? A little bit here. Most of it's going to be to the west. Chances of 3 inches. You can see the same corridor lined out by the European model. Let's go on up to a foot. Let's go on up to 2 feet. And there you go. We really need to see this happen in the Sierra Nevada. All right, from there, what is the jet stream up to? Well, we kind of see it slowly pushing this area of higher heights east, but it's taking a while. There's one trough here. There's a second trough here and a ridge that's kind of tucked away in the middle of it. And the pattern just doesn't progress as fast as you might think it would, all the way out there to February 9th and 10th and the 11th. While most years I'm like, all right, bring that trough over the mountains and see what we can get. This isn't exactly the setup to build, I think, big storm systems into mid-February. If this gets any deeper and changes its inflection a little bit, then yeah, I think we're on. But at this point, too much warm air out ahead of this to really, I think, build in the risk of some big storm systems. So what we end up getting is the subtropical jet stream flow dominates. So if you look at week 2, in fact, I think the Europeans got the best handle on this. We're wetter to the south, a little bit better moisture coming into the plains, drier in the southeast into week 2 into New England. And because we leave the northwest out of the flow, it's drier as well. All right, how about some temperature forecast? Here's today's highs. We already looked at these. Wait until you see Tuesday. We may crack 55 degrees in North Dakota. You get into Wednesday, still mild. Thursday, watch the west cool down by Friday into Saturday and Sunday. But you take the jet stream, and I can't even draw the line. It goes way off the screen and bring it down. Subtropical comes in here. That's a lot of warmth just left in the midsection of the country. And day 5 through 10 really amplifies it. In fact, the 0Z run is much warmer than the 12Z from yesterday. And then day 10 through 15, it just slowly meanders to the east. So this is not a quickly progressing pattern for the rest of the country. Okay, let's talk about longer range now. That's what I wanted to save a lot of these slides for, because on Friday, the Climate Prediction Center released their week 3, week 4 outlook, which will be from February 10th to the 23rd. Mild air west, cooler air south. They went drier kind of on the corners and wetter across the south, all right? Now, we need to see why this might be the case. And one of the things we can do is line it up with other models. Both the GFS Extended and the European Extended have a similar look. See the drier here, the drier there, but wet and wet. There's a lot of subtropical jet activity that they're expecting to continue. Now, just thinking about this, I was trying to dig into the, well, let's talk about why. And I'm going to take you to the MJO plot we stared at so much for the last couple of weeks. Newest forecasts are trying to let it stall out in phase 6-7. Now just remember, these phases, buildup of mild air, these phases, return of cold air. And the models are just kind of lingering. In other words, there's no strong catalyst for movement out of this phase 6 and 7. And unfortunately, that gives us patterns like this. And you just saw this, right? This is what happens in February if you're in phase 6. Guess where the troughs are? Here and here. And that's just what we just saw in the forecast. But I'll just take you back to it. Look, there and there. So a lot of this is looking very phase 6-ish, which you just saw the end result of what that's going to do. It tends to be wetter in California and Southwest and maybe in the plains, but this is not the right kind of pattern to deliver, big systems in the Midwest or Southeast or New England. From there, though, what if we get into phase 7? And phase 7 is even more bland. So we need to get this MJO moving again at some point. Now, given that that's probably where it's going to be for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about mid to late February before we get any sort of a significant shift. And here's what I want to do. If we think that the undercurrent to the whole pattern is El Nino, and we know that El Nino has peaked and it's starting to fade, I wanted to do a couple of things here. I wanted to go back and I wanted to look at every El Nino event, all of them, and just say, well, what did February do? And then what about March? What about spring? And then can we figure anything out about this longer term pattern if we just say, give me a clue of what El Nino years look like? So this is an Ocean Nino Index. In other words, spikes up are El Ninos, spikes down are La Ninas. I'm just going to look at all of the El Nino events. I put them all in here, and this is what you end up getting. So in February, now look at this. In February, for those years that had El Ninos, we tended to actually push the MJO away from phase 5, through phase 6, out of phase 7, toward phase 8 into phase 1. That's where the blues are, the rising motion. So what I just told you is we're kind of stuck somewhere in here. Does at some point in February it get over there? Because if it does, what we end up getting out of that is a pattern looks something like this, where the subtropical jet cranks around this deep low between kind of the Gulf of Alaska and Hawaii. And then this feature over here. This is a good stormy pattern for later in the month. What I don't like about it is it doesn't have much of a polar component to the jet. In other words, if you took this trough and moved it right here, all I would be telling you is prepare for brutally cold air and big, big, big snow. We're not there. This is not the right setup. So what do you end up getting out of that? You end up getting your wet conditions showing up in blue into California in the southwest, or from southern Texas up the east coast, and you leave this area drier and that area drier. And I just showed you, kind of what that looks like. You come back to the European model, a longer range outlook, and what do we have? For February, drier, drier, wetter, wetter. Almost looks exactly like what happened in that pattern. On the temperature side of it, just like the National Weather Service said, well, we just tend to be mild here, cooler than average to the south. So I believe that their long-range forecast for February is just very El Nino-ish, and it seems to be matching up with history. Now, thinking about that, can I add another dimension to this? Let's just go look at their official forecast, and then let's ask another question of these, of El Ninos. So notice that their 30-day outlook looks almost exactly like what El Nino would say for February. There's the temperature, there's the precipitation, and there's the official forecast. So mild, cool, wet, wet, drier, and they have near normal here. So I'm really starting to see that. I think the CPC's bought into this El Nino dominating the pattern throughout February. That's kind of the main story there. But what if we go beyond this time frame? If we go beyond this, I just want to put something in the back of your minds, okay? When I was looking here at the pattern for March into April of all those El Nino years, I start to see a couple of things. The low tends to move toward the Bering Sea, okay, the deep low. We tend to get ridging here, and that's going to help suppress the broad trough south. What I don't like about this setup is that this particular setup tends to produce a lot of severe weather across the south, mid-south, southeast. And it tends to keep things quite cold into March and April down here as well. Unfortunately, it does leave a lot of the northern plains, Canadian prairie, out of the flow. So if we just say, what did El Nino do in the past to March and April? It seems that it's going to be pushing a lot of its severe weather threat early in the spring season and keeping it concentrated, let's just call it, from Texas to Tennessee over to Virginia and every point south. That's one of the big concerns I've got. Now, let's take this, since we March, April, and let's go back and remind ourselves what the model said, because February, March, and April had that same kind of idea. A little bit wetter in the plains, but very wet down here across the south. If there's a drier area, it's in and around the Great Lakes states and in the northwest. That was also echoed by the IRI multi-model probability forecast. See the drier here, the drier there, but wet in this area. So let's do something else with this whole forecast. Let's now play a game where we say, let's just say the CFSV2 is right. Now, what am I comparing it against? The European model said, don't let the El Nino collapse all the way down like this, like the CFS does. It says, let it down slowly. So it's over here by the time we get into summer. But I want to look for those years where we came off of a strong El Nino and finished by the following fall with a strong La Nina as forecast. So we go back to our graph and I say, well, what years are those? Well, 1973 was one of those years. 1983 was one of those years. 1988 was one of those years. 1998 was one of those years. How about 2010 and 2016? So they all went from big El Ninos to La Ninas. And then we're here right now. And the question is, what if we do that? So with that mode of thinking, let's now go look at what happened March, April, May, and June. And what we saw again, Bering Sea low trough over the southwest. Again, this has me concerned for that corridor in terms of severe weather. But with that high to the north, I think it leaves a lot of the northern plains. I mean, we could be looking at some drier risks in the plains for spring. Now, that's only part of the story. I'm talking about the Canadian prairie, the farther to the north. Let's look at it in terms of what happened June to September. Now, very interestingly, June to September, in those key years where I just mentioned the way El Nino changed, we tended to get jet stream flow that favored troughs here and ridges of high pressure there. And the result of having that means that the flow's got to do something like this. Now, with that particular flow setup, what happened historically was in terms of precip, we actually had a wetter corridor through here and we were drier underneath that higher pressure over parts of the east. Now, again, this is only looking at El Nino years that collapse fast. And what it did in terms of temperatures was this: cooler than average west, much hotter than average, really centered right around Michigan and the surrounding states. So much warmer than average here, much cooler than average there. Now, this assumes a fast collapse of El Nino. But remember, we think that the models are too aggressive on how fast it's expected to collapse. So if we go back and say, well, why are the models then, when we go out here to March, April, May, showing so much wet, and then April, May, June, still so much wet here with drought risk in the plains? It's because they are not allowing El Nino to collapse quickly. And in that case, instead of putting all the dry issues here, they pull them back into the plains. You see, we kind of split our years with El Ninos collapsing. The years that collapse fast give us the dry risk here. The ones that collapse slow give us the dry risk there. And you can see that all the way out there to May, June, and July, that's where we start to see the risk of drier weather really showing up. Now, this isn't a spring discussion. This is a late spring and summer issue in this area working on drought. And it is supported by the multi-model forecast here. March, April, May, June, look at this. And then May, June, July. That's going to be the area that the models have currently keyed in on. What I want to tell you, though, is just be aware that if this El Nino collapses very quickly, we're going to switch this discussion to the eastern half of the country. That's all. That's what I wanted to make a point about right now. El Nino being the undercurrent of all of this. Okay, globally, very mild across much of Europe into Russia. Very mild where the big pattern breaks up into that large ridge in the central part of North America. Coldest here is Alaska and Greenland. Also, look at the heat building in Argentina. Look at the warmer conditions returning to Brazil, and the warmth right here across parts of Australia. In fact, in Australia, they do have another tropical system to the north that's causing some flooding there. Taking a look globally at precipitation, I want to focus at the very end here on South America. And as we just take a look at the dryness that's going to be in southern Brazil and Argentina, is it going to be a problem? I don't think so, not in Argentina, but we'll start to watch this in southern Brazil because the temperatures are expected to come up, as you just saw. But where we are in Mato Grosso, the big producing state in the north, their soybean harvest right now is above average, a little over 3.5%, or a little under 3.5%, sorry. But we do expect them to now get into that later planted crop, which means we'll probably cross this over and then work our way like this. What's really telling of what's going on, though, is this corn planting progress. So this year we're well off the 5-year average by about 6%, and we're going to watch to see how this continues to progress going forward. Because the weather right now is showing wetter conditions across the north still. So you can see kind of where the heaviest rains are building up over the next week. Really pretty far to the north here, closer to normal rains here, and then drier farther to the south. Now, I told you there's some heat coming in, but I'm not overly concerned about it right now. NDVI values for Argentina are at record high, one of the best looking crops from space we've seen. But this map right here will be important to watch over the coming weeks. And then, remember what we did earlier, looking at these El Nino years? Well, I pulled off those El Nino years in March into April that El Nino collapsed quickly. And you end up getting a little bit of a wetter signal here, but that's north of Mato Grosso. Mato Grosso is right there. So this whole idea of seeing drier conditions during grain fill continues to show in this area for Brazil. And what I'm comparing this to is if I take this and go to South America, this is remember, May, June, July, that's in the dry season. So March, April, May, we're talking about this risk right in through here. So that continues to be an issue I think we're going to have to talk about going forward. But with that, I'm going to stop here. Tell you all to have a good week. I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning, and we'll pick up there. Thanks.